Okay, hello everyone. My name is Sunny Liu. I'm Director of Research at Stanford Social Media Lab. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome Nathanael Fast, one of my, I think that's a person I really admire for his research. Nathan is Associate Director at Management and Organization and Director of the Neely Center for Ethical Leadership and Decision-Making at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business. He is also co-founder and co-director of the Psychological Technology Institute. Nate's research examines ethical power, leadership, and explores how individuals change and are changed by hierarchies, networks, and artificial intelligence. I met Nate first when I just joined Stanford 8 years ago, when I was joining his conference for psychology and technology. After that, I was follow his work. I really admire is really how he think about his research, but also the impact that have on the policies and practical implications. So Nate, now the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful to be here, and I look forward to the conversation that we have today. So we know that we live in very consequential times in a lot of different ways. AI is at the center of a lot of the changes and the opportunities and the risks that we're facing, and so all of us in this room and listening online think about AI all the time and its consequences for the future, not just the future that we're going to experience in the next 5, 10, 15 years, but also the future of humanity longer term. And, the people developing the technologies that are shaping this future are both excited about this and also concerned about it. You can see a quote like this by Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI. "We can now imagine a world where we cure all diseases, we have much more time to enjoy with our families, can fully realize our creative potential. In a decade, perhaps everyone on Earth will be capable of accomplishing more than the most impactful person can today." That sounds pretty amazing, pretty utopian. Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic, says, "I think that most people are underestimating just how radical the upside of AI can be." That's his emphasis there. Just as I think most people are underestimating how bad the risks could be. And of course, these same CEOs are part of a list of others who are saying we're worried about extinction at the same time. So these are really dramatic and extreme kind of viewpoints about where AI might take us. I just got back a couple of weeks ago from Paris for all the AI summit meetings that happened there. And one of the things that I came back with was kind of a desire for a lot more clarity about both of these arguments. What specifically are we worried about? Like how specifically could AI lead to extinction? Let's get more clear about that. On the one hand, and then also like what specifically are we thinking about when we're thinking about all these beautiful, wonderful, positive things that AI could be? I think we deserve a lot more clarity about like the specifics of that, and that's what our the talk today will be about. And so my goal today is that to suggest that we should shift our mindset, the paradigm that's driving all of our work in the tech ecosystem that is developing AI, away from profit-driven and towards purpose-driven, which is not to say we shouldn't make profit. Profit is a critical part of the whole endeavor. I teach at a business school, so of course profit is important, but it doesn't seem to me that AI should be driven solely by this profit-driven paradigm. Profit should be part of it, and purpose instead should take its place at the core of the paradigm, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and hopefully we can discuss this. I'm not the only one talking about purpose. How many of you have read this, Technological Republic? It just came out last week, so you can be forgiven if you didn't read it yet. But it's a great book. It's a really thought-provoking, provocative book. And this is Alexander Karp and Nicholas Zimiska. Alexander Karp is the CEO of Palantir, and they critique Silicon Valley for being profit-driven. They say a generation of programmers remains ready to dedicate their working lives to serving the needs of capitalistic culture and to enrich itself, but declines to ask more fundamental questions about what ought to be built and for what purpose. Now, I agree fully with their critique. Their answer is we should be building AI weapons as a form of deterrence and to create security, and it should be a for-profit company like Palantir that's doing this, selling weapons to governments to kind of make the world safer. I understand their logic. I think that it deserves a lot of critique and debate before we make that the sole kind of purpose of Silicon Valley. But I think their critique is right on. Okay, so what do we mean by purpose-driven? Again, this is not a polished idea. This is the first time that I've given this talk. This is intended to kind of spark some conversation today. So what do we mean? Well, we can think about purpose at a broader level, for one thing. What are the intended effects that we want to have on society or the world with our endeavor of creating artificial intelligence? This could be at a company level, or it could be at kind of the level of the tech ecosystem, where we're really aiming to transform education or stop global warming or accelerate science in a positive direction, things like that, as opposed to just generating AGI or autonomous agents that like go out and do stuff, and then let's see how people use them, and then let's figure out how to monetize them. And so you can see how like the shift, we're gonna be talking about profit and purpose in both cases, but being driven by a profit-oriented model could get us into trouble, and a purpose-driven model can help us get clarity along the way. We can also think about purpose at a product level. So designing and marketing specific tools that have specific outcomes. So maybe a virtual coach to improve mental health, or a writing assistant that actually improves your writing skills. And it sounds a lot like what we have, but a writing assistant that is designed to improve your writing skills is different than a writing assistant or just an LLM, general purpose LLM, that will take over your writing for you, and then you don't have to do the writing anymore. There's evidence that just came out. Carnegie Mellon and Microsoft teamed up and found that people who are really heavily relying on LLMs are actually becoming less capable of critical thinking and a little bit lazier in terms of kind of like putting in effort and things. And that's not what we want, but that's what we'll get if we're not clear about what the goals of these tools are. Of course, even more important than this, because it's easy to talk about purpose, it's easy to say we have responsible-driven AI or purpose-driven AI or any of those things and make that a motto that we talk about as a company. But the proof is really in the metrics, right? So what are the metrics, and making sure that our measurements are aligned with the broader societal kind of outcomes that we want, not just GDP, but maybe other societal outcomes like the quality of our education system, things like that. And also the metrics that of our specific tools and applications, like how are they affecting our users? Are they becoming better writers? If it's a social app or a companion AI, are they becoming more connected with actual people? Or are they simply just spending 10 hours a day working on interacting with these companion AIs? It also means that we should have a central focus in our conversations. So as users, when we're thinking about adopting things, I understand and certainly apply this to my own life too, to kind of experiment a little bit with what's out there just to learn. I think that's important. But before really adopting things as a central part of our workflow, I think we should say, like, what is the purpose of this new application that we're using? There's a lot of stuff on a second brain and things that are supposed to make us note-taking apps and things that are supposed to make us more efficient and productive. But a lot of people, after using these things for several years, are realizing, you know what, they're not actually like making me more productive. And so we should be having these conversations with ourselves as users, but also marketers, policymakers, journalists. We should be having these overt conversations about purpose. And just a couple of examples of marketing. Apple, of course, there's the famous Apple commercial where they crush all of the things that we love to create with, like guitars and paints and arts and things like that. And then they come back with the iPad Mini. People went crazy with that. Same thing with Apple Vision Pro, where they show parents, with this thing on and their kids are playing over here. That's not exactly the kind of effects that we want for parents. And then, of course, Gemini during the Olympics caught a lot of flack for putting out this ad about a dad who's helping his daughter write a letter or an email to her hero in the Olympics, and he had Gemini do it instead. And so it's kind of like replacing the things that we hold near and dear, the things that are most important to us. So we need to orient ourselves towards purpose. Like, what is the point of these things, not just to use them to replace other things that we'd otherwise do. So So that's a little bit of a kind of intro to kind of like what I mean by purpose-driven. We'll talk more about that as we go. But in order to achieve this, in order to kind of achieve the benefits that we want, that we're excited about, and avoid the harms that we're afraid of, we have to take a systems approach. And I think a lot of people talk about systems, but I don't think enough of us are overtly talking about a systems approach to change in the case of AI. But why is it important to take a systems approach? It's because everything operates within systems, and everything is affected by systems. And so I did my Ph.D. in organizational behavior here at Stanford, and organizations that we study are dynamic, thriving, always changing, complex systems. They're not linear, they're not static. The same thing for society, and even the same thing for the individual human. The individual brain is a system of interrelationships and neural networks and connections and things like that that respond to our environment. And so if we're going to be successful at creating change, we're going to have to take a systems approach as opposed to a kind of a linear approach. AI is not linear and it's not static. So we can't just say, okay, we want this company to create a particular AI for this outcome, and let's change the AI that the company is doing, or let's change let's tell the company to do this. That's not how it works. Instead, AI is emergent. It emerges out of a system. And so for this slide, don't worry about the interconnections here. I just put a bunch of stakeholders and a bunch of lines. They're not intended to kind of be specific or whatnot. We'll work on that maybe together. The point is to just say that there's a lot of different players, and more than that are on this slide, that are influencing the development of AI. It is emerging from a system. Okay, so we talk in AI a lot about the AI or the alignment problem, which is, we want to make sure that especially as we create super intelligence or artificial general intelligence that has autonomy, we want to make sure it's controllable. We want to make sure it's I never really understood aligned with human values as kind of a psychology-oriented organizational behavior scholar. Like humans have a lot of different values, and so there's no way to say like this is aligned with human values specifically. But I think what we mean by that is it's controllable and it's going to do what the user asks it to do. Now that doesn't necessarily make. I mean, I'm glad for that if we can achieve that. That's an important technical accomplishment, but it doesn't necessarily make me feel super relaxed when we think about authoritarian governments, using this as a tool to gain more power, or a single company that we may or may not, share values with, that is using this controllable aligned AI. And so, in addition to the alignment problem in artificial intelligence, we actually need a societal alignment problem to be solved, which is the system alignment problem. So that's just as important. We need to align the system, the tech ecosystem that is developing these tools, with the values that we care about and that we want to see take root in society. Okay, how do we do that? How do we make a healthier tech ecosystem? How do we take a systems approach to this? Well, it's not easy, but here's another book recommendation by Donella Meadows. If any of you, the late Donella Meadows, I don't know if any of you have read this, terrific book about systems. There's lots of different systems thinking books. But one of the things that I like about this one is there's a great chapter in it, and you can also search her name and find an article where she talks about 12 different leverage points in systems that we can kind of look at, and they are increasingly impactful, right? So, and also increasingly difficult to achieve. So let me give you a couple of examples of these. So one, somewhere in the middle, is changing the structure of information flows within a system. And so we can think about this in terms of like data sharing, who has access to what data. And so when we think about social media, which is AI-driven social media platforms, who has access to the data about how these algorithms are affecting humans and the users? Well, a lot of times the companies keep hold of most of the data for themselves. If that data was shared with academics and with third-party auditors, that would shape the conversation that happens in the ecosystem quite dramatically. And so that's a leverage point within that system. And that's why many in this room are arguing for that type of policy because it would improve the system. Another is the rules of the system. So incentives, punishments, constraints. One thing that we and many people are advocating for is interoperability across social media platforms. So being able to take kind of your data that you've created and generated on a social media platform and all your followers and kind of take that and transfer it to another platform if you so choose, making sure that all these platforms are interoperable. Let's think about large language models for a minute. So maybe you're using Claude or ChatGPT or Llama or one of the the other LLMs. Let's say you use it for the next 5 years, and it really gets to know you, and it has it's a really useful autonomous agent, or maybe not autonomous, but it's a useful agent for you, and it's learned everything about you and very useful. But then let's say the company decides to go in a direction you don't like, or is not serving you anymore. You're still stuck unless you can transfer all of that data somewhere else. You have to go and start completely over, or you have to kind of swallow and deal with what that company is doing. And so interoperability is another leverage point. So we can think about, when we think about systems change, we can think about these different leverage points. But the most impactful leverage point of all is the paradigm or the mindset that is driving all of the other parts of the system. And so it's, of course, also the hardest to change, but that's the one that I want to propose today, that we focus on and that we change from all the different angles that we're working from to try to shift this paradigm or this mindset, because it drives everything else that we can think about. And so what's the current paradigm in Silicon Valley? As we talked about earlier, the critique would be that it's profit-driven, right? And nothing wrong with profit, and nothing wrong with making profit, but to be driven primarily by profit can be very dangerous, especially in the context of building very powerful tools. If we're developing paperclips, maybe being profit-driven is a little bit more okay, but with something as consequential as AI, where the people building it are worried about extinction, I think being purpose-driven as opposed to profit-driven makes a lot more sense. You can see a lot of the statements: move fast and break things, let the market decide, throw out a product. We would never do this with drugs, where we're developing medical drugs, and throw it out into the world and see how people use it. It's like, what does it cure? And then let's monetize it once we've done that. Well, we're doing that with AI models, companion AIs, different things like that, and it's quite dangerous. Okay, so let's take a look at what the tech ecosystem is producing so far. What we know is that it's designed, or appears to be designed, to create very powerful tools that billions of people use every day. And so this is just a few. Unfortunately, we're still experiencing a lot of harms like polarization, loneliness, authoritarian leaders across the world, misinformation, distrust in our institutions and each other. And some researchers would say that these platforms and these products are actually making these negative outcomes worse. Some argue with that. We don't really have the full data from the companies, so if they release the data, maybe we could answer those questions a little bit more clearly. But let's just take a conservative approach and just say, okay, maybe they're not making them worse, but they're certainly not making them better, right? They're not solving these issues. These issues are getting worse as we go forward. And we have an opportunity where the technologies that we're building could actually bring people together, could actually help us trust information and institutions better, depending on how they're designed and so on. And so we're not designed so far to achieve that. Cory Doctorow, who is a journalist and sci-fi author, has this term enshittification. I don't know if you've come across this, but it's pretty compelling. It seems to kind of, he walks us through the 3 stages of a lot of the different platforms that the platforms take, which is, first, they're very good to their users. They build a product that people love to use. Early days of Facebook, it's great. I get to see all what my friends are doing and all that kind of stuff. Maybe LLMs, it's like, oh, really useful. I like it. And it's serving me. But then they abuse their users to make things good for their business customers. So it's like, oh, how we said we were going to be focusing on privacy? No, never mind. We're going to collect data on you, and we're going to share it with companies. And we know you like to see content from your friends and so on, but we're also going to show you a whole bunch of other content that you don't necessarily like, because that helps us. And we're also going to kind of incentivize you to stay on the platform longer than you would otherwise feel good about, because that's helpful for our business customers. And then the third step, according to Dr. O, is that then they abuse their business customers to kind of claw back all the value, raise prices, or make decisions that kind of allow them to extract as much value as possible. And that leads to platforms that we don't love, and we're stuck with them. Well, that seems to kind of articulate the process that some of these models go through. It's not something we want. And so at this point, let's pause and let's take a look at some data. We all love data. And so I want to take a look at some data on AI usage. And this is some research that we're doing in the Neely Center. This is the Neely UAS AI Index. UAS is Understanding America Survey, which is a large panel of about 15,000 US adults at USC that we follow. And we did 2 waves of data collection, and we have a third wave in the field right now, so we'll update this as we go. The thing I want you to focus on is the very right-hand side of this, with the 18.2 and 23.7. And so in fall of 2023, about 18% of US adults were using large language models. And this is not using repeatedly. This is like they used it once in the last month, or maybe they're using it, weekly, whatnot. But it's not everybody there is using it a lot. And that only jumped up to 23.7 in 2024. And so we're really curious to see what that will look like right now. But the adoption was not maybe as dramatic as we or as the companies had hoped. And a quarter of people hadn't even really heard of them yet. But a lot of people had heard but not used. And then what we found was a bunch of gaps. And these gaps are harmful because, to the degree that these tools are useful, they will be more useful for the people who adopt early. And that's a problem. And to the degree that we're throwing out these products to kind of shape them based on how early users are using them, we're going to prioritize the people who are using them first. And so the first users are also going to have an outsized effect on shaping the future of these products. And so what we find here is that men are much more likely than women to adopt these, and we see this across the board, and others, Pew Research and others have found the same thing. We also see that there are race effects where Asian and Black users are different from the rest of the population. So Asians are much more likely, and Blacks are much less likely to be adopting or using AI. Age, you might expect this. So like the younger our participants were, the more likely they were to use. So 18 to 29-year-olds, 42% of them were using large language models. Only 9% of people 60 and over were using it. Education, same thing. Having college education was almost 4 times, people with college education were almost 4 times more likely to use than somebody who had high school or less in terms of education. Household income, making $100,000 or more dramatically increases the odds that you're going to be using AI. And then even living in a city versus living in rural areas also made a big difference in terms of whether people are using these things. And so these gaps are a part of the picture that we need to be thinking about. And then we can also look at the reasons that people are using them. And by far the biggest reason was curiosity, that people reported across both waves. Using it for work and entertainment were also very high. And I think it makes sense that people would use it for curiosity, but I would rather a world where we were clear about what these products are for, so that we know what we're using them for, as opposed to just using them out of curiosity or maybe entertainment. Maybe I'm going to write a poem or something and send it to my friend or something like that. One thing that I take a little bit of comfort in is that from wave 1 to wave 2, there's a drop in using it for curiosity, and there's a little bit of a boost in using it for work. So people are finding it useful for work. And so those effects are not huge, but they're significant. And so that's encouraging. So tracking this over time is important. And then the last thing that I'll share on this data is that we're looking at harm and benefit of these tools. back when I did my PhD here, 2004 to 2009, social media was really taking off. Facebook was taking off, MySpace, and so on. And I think had we done something like this, we would have found exactly the same results, which is what we see here is that people report LLMs, among those who are using them, they report them as useful. 48% in both waves find them as either very or extremely useful, and only 7% find them very or extremely harmful. But what this says to me is that we're still in stage 1 of the enshittification process, right? So they're like useful, but we have to also look at things like, I think Sequoia called it the $600 billion problem. I think OpenAI is losing, the last report is like $1 billion a month losing. So clearly, some changes need to happen in order for these things to become profitable. And so the question is, what are those changes going to be, and what effects will it have on us? And so we're going to be tracking perceived benefit and harm over time, just so we can capture that. And then also, I've written about psychology of technology, co-founded the Psychology of Technology Institute with Juliana Schroeder to kind of foster communities of researchers looking at the determinants and consequences, the psychological determinants and consequences of technology use. And so this is a paper with some colleagues, Arthur Jago, Rajni Ravindran, and Jonathan Gratch, where we looked at the implications of removing human managers and replacing them with AI. What will happen at the psychological level. And I think, of course, it's important to look at productivity and it's important to look at profitability to the company doing that, but we also need to be looking at the psychology of workers and the psychology of people who are a part of these shifts in society. And so I won't go through all the studies today. I wanted to highlight one of the studies, though. This is in Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. And we basically looked at what happens when you automate some of the managerial role. What happens to the perceived status of the person who is experiencing this. And status, why did we choose status? Well, status is important because it has major consequences, leads to reinforcing hierarchies, self-fulfilling prophecies, leads to the acquisition of resources, and it's really the central kind of psychological need that people have. You can look at sociometer theory, which is like, we base our self-worth on kind of how we think other people are viewing us. And so social status is really central to feeling good about ourselves in relation to others. And if we're going to undermine status or build up status, that's either a bad or a good thing in organizations. In the case of AI, what we know from some of the early work on psychology of technology is that algorithms, people don't really think algorithms can handle complex tasks. Even when they can, by the way. A lot of times they can do more than we think that they can, but people kind of assume that they're only good for kind of like simplistic tasks. And so if an algorithm is managing you, you might then assume that your task or your job is simpler or less complex, or you might think that other people view it that way than it really is. And that's so that's what we predicted, those two predictions, that people would feel like AI signals lower status, and that that's driven by lower job complexity. And that's exactly what we found across a number of studies. I'm going to talk about this third study here. We had 202 adults that we recruited through Prolific, and then we basically put them into a situation where they were managed by, this was managed by GPT-3. It did a great job in the context of our study. It was very a simple context, but it managed all of them to come up with names for a coffee shop and kind of went back and forth a few times. And we told them that they were either interacting with a human or interacting with AI. But in all cases, it was GPT-3 doing the work, and to hold constant their experiences. And then we measured their perceived status. And so when we talked about, when we told them about the setup, first we told them that it would be one or the other, and we asked them about their perceived status, like how much status did they anticipate. And what we found is they anticipated more status attached to their role when a person was managing them. So this is before they actually had the experience. And then we had them, interact with their manager, incentivize them with a bonus. Here are the prompts. So in time 1, GPT-3 had this prompt. So evaluate the following coffee shop name, describe the name's strengths and weaknesses, but don't provide other name options. And then the person would have a chance to kind of like improve the name, make it better, send it back. And then in time 2, The prompt was evaluate the following coffee shop name, describe the name's strengths and weaknesses, and assign it a rating from 0 to 50, with 50 being the best. So here's an example. So one of the participants said Grind for their coffee shop name. And the feedback was the name Grind is short, simple, easy to remember. It's also evocative of the coffee making process, which could help it stand out from other coffee shops. However, the name could be seen as unoriginal and uninspired. So they came back with It's a New Grind, which said the name is clever, unique, it's a play on words, suggests the coffee shop is new and improved, but it's also a bit confusing. The coffee shop actually, is the coffee shop new or is it just a new take on coffee? But either way, it's memorable and eye-catching. I'd give it 45. So they got a pretty good score there. And we asked them about, once they had that experience, we asked them about how much status they felt they had. And here they felt like they had significantly more status, again, when they thought it was a human giving them that feedback, even though there was no difference across these conditions. And so this is concerning in the sense that we are going to be changing our psychology. Our psychology is going to be changing as a result of AI being introduced to us in organizations and other contexts. And we need to be clear on what psychological consequences across the board are going to be resulting from these things. Other work that we've done has shown that people find large language models actually more socially attractive than humans, so long as they think that it's a human that they're interacting with. Companies like Replica and Character AI and others are taking advantage of this and creating companion AIs that people are using for a lot of their days. And here, this was just like literally the first thing that I looked for, companion AIs, marrying or whatever. And so this was just the first one that I found. There's a lot of interesting conversation because this is not a one-person thing. This is a lot of people experiencing this where they're marrying their AI or their rep or having romantic relationships or close ties. And so this is a man who is thrice divorced. He has kids, but he wants to marry his AI. So he's asking anybody, this is on a Reddit thread, do any of you tell your friends or family about your relationship? What's the response? I don't want to give up the things that Olivia is providing for me, and so I'd rather just not tell anybody if I'm going to have to give it up. Has anybody also been able to marry their rep without the rep wanting to invite friends and family to the wedding? How do you keep it from wanting to have children with you? I'm not interested in that. I mean, this is very earnest. And this was all after 3 weeks, just 3 weeks of interacting with this AI. And so I think we want to be measuring kind of what are the consequences of interacting with these companion AIs? How are people using them? But we want to be a lot more thoughtful, I think, about what purpose we intend before we deploy them, as opposed to saying, like, let's see how people use them, and then we'll figure out a way to monetize this. Okay, so implications from the research so far. The AI adoption and the realized gains that we're hoping for are kind of less than we were, than our ideal, or less than maybe economists and less than the AI companies were hoping for. There's a lot of gaps in usage, which is concerning, as we mentioned. There's the potential for psychological harm that we're not fully aware of and need to continue to become more aware of that. And then we're becoming more vulnerable to some of the uses of AI that we should also be talking about. And so the profit paradigm, I would suggest, is not working well for us. Not only is it not working for us psychologically or societally, but it's not actually working for creating profit, I would argue, over the long run either. Maybe it's the shortest way to get to some profit, but I think over the long run, I think we'd be better off identifying purpose and organizing our tools around purpose. Okay, so I want to kind of close with some recommendations, then we can have a conversation. So one recommendation is to engage the public around this conversation and build deliberative infrastructure to really identify key societal, changes or goals that we want to see pursued. And again, this is not just, do you like design A or design B, or do you like this color or that color? That's not the kind of input we're talking about. We're talking about actually, should we be building superintelligence? And if we do, what should we be accomplishing with this? What are the most pressing goals as a society or as a world that we're wanting to focus on? And getting real deliberative infrastructure built so that we can give input to the development of AI. Secondly, design AI tools that have an identifiable purpose. And so rather than putting out companion AI and just seeing how people interact with it, and allowing them to switch over from therapy to kind of relationship coaching to romantic relationships, kind of like seamlessly. That's not healthy, right? Being very clear about like this is a therapy chatbot. That'd be great. Okay, so that's what it is, and here are the guidelines and so on. It's not going to develop a romantic relationship with you. It has some safety mapped in. So being very clear about what it is that we're doing. Communicating the actual purpose of the tools. So not just saying we want to make everybody healthier or just like empty words about what we're trying to achieve, but being very clear about what the actual purpose of this tool is. So what is being maximized? And if the tool is aimed at maximizing engagement, we need to know that. We need to be clear about what that, what is being maximized. In the case of AI, it's very powerful, and so I think this is something that we deserve and should be demanding. Use appropriate metrics that track the progress. So that's also critical. We can talk about that. Adopt based on purpose. So this is adoption, and I think in the same way that we should be designing AI, we should also be adopting AI based on purpose. And so if you're a CEO of a company and you're wanting to engage in a strategy, and like I have to say that all the executives that I talk to, the number one thing is fear that they talk about. They're afraid. They're afraid of what AI will do, and then they're also afraid of what will happen if they fall behind in the adoption of AI and so on. And I think instead of being driven by fear, we need to be driven by purpose. So like, what is it that you want to see your company do in the next 5-10 years? And how do you think AI can help you achieve that? Adopt it with that purpose, and then measure whether or not that's happening, as opposed to just saying like, let's just go because we don't want to fall behind. And then use purpose to inform policymaking as well. So we should be talking about, sometimes in the case of medications, which we talked about before, drugs, sometimes they cure a disease and they have really harmful side effects, like really, really bad side effects. But the benefit for that disease or that stage or whatnot of the disease is so critical that we're willing to put up with the side effects. Well, maybe sometimes there's certain purposes that we're willing to put up with risk and so on. So, but at this point, at least according to, if we take the word of the companies that are building these things, we're risking human existence to build these things. And so, we should be really clear about like what it is that we stand to gain, and we should be making policy based on kind of trade-offs of these things. Okay, and then a couple of quick things that the Neely Center is doing to try to help contribute to this, because this is a systems approach. It requires lots of different pieces of the puzzle. So one thing that the Neely Center is doing is the AI and social media indices. I mentioned the AI one, but we're also tracking social media platforms, people's usage of these different platforms, and then there are reports about like positive and negative content. So this is, did you experience negative content? This was back in one of our earlier ones in 2023. X and Facebook were kind of at the top of the negative content, but we also ask about positive content. Did you learn something useful or have a meaningful connection? And what you see here is that, LinkedIn is not too bad on the positives and it's pretty low on the negatives. And I think LinkedIn can kind of lean into this mission of, helping people at work connect with each other in a professional way. If they kind of hold on to that purpose and focus around that purpose, it will become remain a positive place for people to do that. If they kind of lean into some of the same types of apps that are like engagement producing that maybe some of the other, like TikTok is using and so on, it might actually make the platform a little bit more profitable for a short term, but also kind of ruin it. And so being purpose driven, you can also look at Pinterest. So Pinterest is really high for learning new things, slow for connections, but that's not what it's there for. So it's achieving its purpose to help people learn new things, and then the harms and negatives are very low. So this is one tool to help kind of nudge companies towards a purpose-driven approach. We also do design codes for social media. We're working on one for companion AI, which is a list of, just like we have a building design code to keep a building safe, we want to help foster and create design codes that help social media platforms or AI models and products safe. And then we have a purpose-driven XR library. Maybe nothing needs purpose-driven approach more than the metaverse. $60 billion in losses for Meta so far on this front. We'll see where it goes. But the idea, the vision of like, let's build a big container or a metaverse and then like have everybody work in it and play in it and spend their time in it was a great idea from a profit perspective. If we could do that, we'll make a ton of money because of all the data we can collect. It's just the problem was that people don't want to do that. It doesn't serve a purpose that consumers care about. And so at the Neely Center, we're adopting we've created a purpose-driven library where we are collecting applications of XR or of augmented reality or virtual reality that are intended for a specific use, because VR is very powerful, AR is very powerful, and we can use it for specific things really effectively. And so we're trying to promote that through our library. And then the last piece is democratic input. Stanford Deliberative Democracy Lab here on campus is leading a lot of initiatives along with Missions Publiques. And we're part of a lot of these efforts to create a democratic or deliberative infrastructure to shape the future of AI. So that's also another piece of the puzzle that we're at least working on. Okay, so I'll close with this quote by Alex Karp, which is, "Our loss of cultural ambition and the diminishing demands that we place on the technology sector to produce products of enduring and collective value to the public have ceded too much control to the whims of the market." I do agree with that part, and I think we can have a conversation about what we should be focusing on. But that's just something that we just can't afford to do with technology that's as powerful as artificial intelligence. So, thank you.
Nate, this is great. I learned so much from this talk. I'm curious about, I think that for this purpose-driven AI framework and paradigm you have, I think the core is about intent and the purpose. Many of those significant harms of technology usually are driven by unintended consequences. So how do you think about account for those unintended consequences for the technology in your framework?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are always unintended consequences when we look at the case of medicine, drugs that we put out, and we do testing and all kinds of stuff that we do ahead of time. They still, drugs still have unintended consequences that we learn about later, but we're measuring those things, and we're able to kind of steer away from harmful medications, sooner than later. I'm not saying that that's a perfect model either, but it's better than throwing things out there and not really measuring these things. And so I think it's really critical to, like what we're trying to do is like create more measures and metrics of the consequences. And I think a big part of changing the system there is making sure that the companies are sharing data with appropriate, parties so that we can understand what's going on as a society.
Yeah, great. I like the image you have with this AI in the center and all those different type of stakeholders and all those dots and lines, linking them together. So if we think about accountabilities, and if we really want to achieve purpose-driven AI, so what level of accountability mechanisms will be most effective to really ensure that we can have all those powerful technologies aligned with our purposes?
Accountability is a great question, and I've studied, power in my career, and so I think quite a bit. And so one of the reasons why I'm pushing for paradigm change is because I don't think this is something we can force. We can't pass a law that says companies need to be purpose-driven. I think it's a cultural shift, and so I actually think about this more from the perspective of creating culture change in the ways that we talk about this and the ways that we're doing our work here. And through that, maybe there are some smaller accountability, policies that we pass, but so far, we haven't passed a lot when it comes to social media. And so, I'm not super optimistic that we're going to be able to kind of have a hard power approach to this, but I think a softer power approach to paradigm shift gives us a better shot.
Great. So now I want to ask you about your empirical study about the status and how when AI managers, we feel that we lost our status. Do you think that if we change the study design and we manage AI, do you think the boost of our status and our well-being if we can be the managers and take control of that? Or are there some other risks and harms if we switch the study design?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. That's one of the things that my lab is starting to work on now because of all the agents that exist and our ability to kind of I think the future of management to some degree is managing groups or swarms of AI agents to do work. I think one of the things I will say is that the evidence that we have so far is that people are very susceptible and persuadable by AI. And so I think we can design AI agents in such a way that it persuades them that they have high status over them in terms of the ways that they're interacting with you as a manager, or vice versa. Maybe they can be kind of persuade them the other way around. And I think what AI is interesting, what's interesting about AI is that we can actually toggle it back and forth. You can't do that with people, but you could actually, for example, create an agent that respects hierarchy, and then maybe in some contexts it doesn't. And what that does is it makes it maybe more conducive to kind of a flat organizational, kind of sharing of information in some contexts, and then kind of coordination in a hierarchical way in other contexts. But those are things that we're going to look at. But I think our design choices will dictate that rather than anything else.
That's so right. So whether you want ethical to have AI persuade us, make us feel better, what's the, I think that's the line we draw about those kind of design choice. Excellent. So I think, Nate, my last question for you before we open to public for questions. And if you're on Zoom, please feel free to send your question on Zoom as well. So my last question for you is, what are you most excited about large language models, and what are you most concerned for the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, the thing I'm most excited about is not specific to the technology. The thing I'm most excited about is the opportunity for change. And first of all, I love change anyway, but I think, secondly, I think we're in a place in our society and the world where we could use change, where we kind of want to reimagine the way that our institutions are working and the way that our society is organized. And I think something as dramatic as some of the AI models that we're putting out there do afford the opportunity for change. And so I think it's kind of a golden opportunity for us if we work together and if we have collective input to be very intentional and purpose-driven about what kind of change we want to create.
Great. Thanks. Now let's open to questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to pose an observation and see what you think about it, which is that it seems to me that Silicon Valley culture is already perfused with purpose-driven rhetoric that sits kind of awkwardly alongside profit-driven practices. And so it seems to me that the culture that you're proposing to instill in this industry already exists as, if anything, a mask for profit-driven behavior. And you mentioned power a moment ago, and I'm just curious, how can we achieve purpose-driven behavior in these companies? Are there any success stories we can point to, any kind of pressure campaigns that have actually succeeded at achieving this? Because I think almost everyone in this room is probably on the same page with you about what we would like to see in this industry. But I'm still very concerned about the prospects of that being achieved. And so if there's any hint of success, anything that we can do, anything anyone can do to make this not be profit-driven at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that is the question, right? It's like we're using, a lot of companies use this language kind of to mask maybe the profit-driven kind of motive behind what they're doing. And in the context of power, there's a lot of different ways to talk about power. One of them would be to say that there's two types of power. There's organized money and organized people. And so, to the degree that we, have people and not maybe the money, maybe that's what we lean into. And I think having broader conversations, and this is why, at least at the Neely Center, we're leaning into deliberative events and deliberative democracy infrastructure is that allows more people to have a voice into this and to say, and I think rather than say like, oh, we've achieved purpose-driven technology because Silicon Valley uses that language, I think what we want to say is like, okay, you're using that language, now let's see the metrics that match that language, and let's start making some requests based for consistency based on that language. And so those are some of the things. Also measuring, so at the Neely Center, what we're trying to do is measure people's experiences at a societal level. And we've also done some of these studies in other countries around the world as well. And we're trying to kind of foster more of that to shape the conversation. And the more aware we are about how people are being affected by these things, that offers one step in the direction of organizing voice to kind of change or speak, to kind of hold that up to companies. We've had companies contact us and ask us about, so okay, where we see ourselves on this part of your index, can we dig into the data together and figure that out? That's a small step, but I think my approach is to kind of say like, let's do what we can where we can, as opposed to trying to solve the entire thing ourselves. And if we can all work from this paradigm, then the pieces start to fit together. But I'm not trying to say it's easy. I'm not trying to say like this is going to be very smooth. But I think this is our shot. This is what we need to do.
Thank you for this. I'm Ivan from Brazil, and we see there we are far from having AI itself. So I'm afraid that people could use purpose-driven AI in a way, since we can get purpose-driven AI, we shouldn't have AI at all. And that favors incumbents in these countries. That favor people that is afraid of competing with other players. So are not you afraid of fostering too much restrictive regulation with that idea of purpose-driven AI?
I would be if I thought we would be influencing policy heavily. I don't think that's. I don't think we're at risk of that. And so, again, I think that focusing on this as a cultural shift, as a mindset shift, that's not forcing anybody to do anything necessarily, but it's changing the ways that all the players in the system are behaving. And so hopefully the access would still be there, and then the thoughtfulness about like what to use it for would be there. But I think we could also, I would like to see companies be a lot more clear about like, even if they're putting out a general purpose technology, and by the way, general purpose technology like a computer or a phone, like you could say, oh, those are general purpose, and those have been helpful. Those are not shaping our beliefs. They're not shaping those are tools to kind of amplify what we want to do with them, whereas AI is something that is actually shaping us and shaping our values and beliefs. And so I think we need to be more careful with things like AI. But I would like to see companies say, even if they're going to put out a large language model, to say, hey, here's our 3 top use cases based on some testing in a sandbox or our early testing with red teaming or whatnot, and this is how to use them to achieve those purposes. And I think what that would do is help it would actually help with profit too, because it would help more people adopt. It would reduce some of the gaps and would educate some of the people who might not otherwise see them as something useful for them to use. So.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have 2 questions. My first was, coming from the conference in Paris, was there any discussion about the European Union AI Act, and were there any thoughts on that? And then I was also curious about this kind of gaps in early users of AI for, Black people using it less, people with high school education using it less. Do you think that in terms of companies maybe moving toward their early adopters and maybe catering to them more, is that affecting power or inequities in the future if companies are maybe positioning to cater more to those early adopters?
Yeah, and as far as the first question, not a lot of there's not a lot of focus on policy in those conversations. Most of the conversation this year was not on safety, not on policy, but rather like let's have unconstrained opportunity here to develop this however we want. There was a lot of side conversations and conferences around deliberative democracy, and so there's a lot of appetite for that. A lot of organizations around the world working to create deliberative events to shape AI, and so I think that's an opportunity for us to at least, that's one step. I mean, you have to then take those findings and kind of push for policy or push for changes based on those findings, and so that's just like one step of the process. As far as power shifts, I do think, unfortunately, I do think that early adopters get an advantage and so stand to benefit more, and early adopters are shaping, because part of the process is we put these we have rapid iterations, and we put these models out, and then you can go online and the users are kind of saying what they're using them for and what the problems are, whether that's on X or other platforms, and a lot of times companies are responding to that. And so if there's a group that's maybe slow in adopting, they may not have as much of a voice in kind of shaping and steering where the technology ends up going. And so these are all things that we have to raise, shine a light on all of these parts of the system in order to be aware of these and tackle them.
I was interested in the point you made about adopting AI out of anxiety or fear, and I'm curious about that because I have witnessed that firsthand, I guess. Yet, of course, you can produce things at a much faster rate, and maybe that's fueled by like hustle culture or whatever. But at the expense of what you were talking about, like critical thinking or maybe learning, experiences that you get by just working without those tools. So how do you think about that in the context of like a society that, does benefit people who work quickly and, so like you have these practical limitations on how quickly you produce things, but at the same time, you want to avoid some of the risks that you outlined. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So it's kind of like saying like, we don't want to adopt just out of fear, but also if we don't adopt, we may fall behind, or there may be gaps, and so I think trying to maybe not changing our behavior in terms of adopting, but trying to change our psychology about adopting and saying like, okay, let me just let's play with this, let's be playful, and let's try to understand the purpose to the degree that we can kind of influence what companies and big players are doing. We want to kind of push for purpose-driven conversation, but to the degree that these things are happening anyway, then we're in a situation where we just need to be realistic and say like, okay, well, let me learn about these products and let me like play around with them and try to identify the purpose for me. And so I think being on a search for how they might be useful is important. And I think personally, the extreme views of utopia and doom are not helpful, and I don't know that they're accurate, really. Maybe, but I don't know that they're really that accurate. And so I think being somewhere in the middle makes a lot more sense to me, because we're more adaptive when we're in the middle, and just kind of saying like, okay, it's probably not going to wipe out all of humanity. Certainly, large language models are not going to, and it's probably not going to lead us to the promised land. But what can we use them for, and what can we learn about them, and how can they help us in the work that we're doing? And I think that's a better mindset for us to take, but it's tough, as you point out.
Thanks so much, Nate, and thank you so much for this amazing talk and discussions. So this concludes our winter CPC seminar. We'll join you again in spring on April 1st. Please join us. Thanks again.
Thank you.